Buying a home is stressful enough without finding out at the 11th hour that you need to find thousands of dollars you didn't know you needed from somewhere, or risk losing your home and savings. In this episode, we deconstruct a first home buyer horror story that appeared in the news and look at how this could have been avoided.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about avoidable mistakes, and one in particular that recently made it into the news. A first home buyer whose HECS debt almost caused financial disaster. What happened, and more importantly, what didn't happen. But before we get to that, what is your special house behind you this week, Meighan, in the video?
Well, of course, Veronica, we're here to teach people how to buy their first home, the do-it-yourself course, if you like, but we both are buyer's agents. This is a home that we bought for a first home buyer 2 days ago. Look at that. Isn't it gorgeous? It's
very
low-set
pretty
brick. It's about 11 kilometres from the Brisbane CBD, and we bought it for about $890,000. So very happy first home buyer, and I think that's a lovely little asset for them and very focused on the investment fundamentals.
Now, if you're watching the video, you'll see that it does indeed look like a very, very nicely maintained property. And one thing that really strikes me...
Grandma's house.
Yes, I love a Nana's house. All those trees that have been beautifully shaped into sort of, they look all a bit like microphones, really.
How pretty. Yes, beautiful.
Are your first home buyers going to keep looking like that? I'm curious.
Actually, they're a mature first home buyer. So yes, she does love gardening and she thinks they are beautiful. So I think there is going to be a little bit of time spent out in those, keeping that beautifully manicured as well.
Pruning those trees. Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, it's been some time since we've brought you a first home buyer horror story that's made the headline, but this one grabbed us. And there's a few reasons why we like doing these stories, mainly to help you avoid making the same mistakes by following the trail and pointing out where these people could have made better decisions if only they knew what they clearly didn't know. Every horror story we've reviewed was completely avoidable, which is absolutely tragic. Now, if you want to go back to some of those episodes, I've listed them. We'll have them in the show notes, but like 58, 62, 78, 82, 123, 126. So
lots to learn.
Been about 50 episodes since we've done, almost a year pretty much since we last did one.
Now, to be honest, this one isn't half as tragic as some of the case studies we've looked at where people have lost enormous amounts of money. And the headline gives an insight into the emotive nature of buying property and how it feeds into clickbait articles. So, Veronica, here's the headline. Hit us with it.
Gen Zer reveals how her HECS debt almost shattered her real estate dreams. A young Aussie has opened up about her humiliating experience, that was in inverted commas, when trying to buy her first home and the nightmare 24 hours she endured as a result.
Oh, it sounds awful.
And it would have been fun. We're not making light of it.
It would not have been fun, but we are talking about 24 hours. So
yes,
just right now we're going to say everything was okay. we're not, we're not having a go here, but we really want you to learn what's behind this and what you can do differently so that you don't end up being, in 24 hours of hell or months and months of losses. So that's what today's about.
And this 24 hours of hell, somebody else might have actually turned out to be completely different, may not have worked out for them. So it's serious, even though for her it worked out and it sounds a bit overly dramatised, it's still serious.
It is, yeah. Now, the young woman in the article is like many of our students. She's been a great saver, and it looks like she got stuck into saving straight after finishing uni, starting at the age of 21. So after 5 years, she was ready to buy. That is phenomenal to be able to save a deposit in that period of time. Well done, I say to her.
Is amazing. Now, she was buying in the Gold Coast, so it might have been a little easier than some other areas of Australia, but hey, it is an incredible achievement, really, and she did some things right. She saved more than she thought she needed, right? So she would have a buffer. But she also, I'll caveat that by saying she did not have an accurate figure for what she actually needed. We will get to that. And another thing she did right was that she used a broker and she informed her broker about her HECS debt, but unfortunately, he seemed to not register that it would be an issue, and so we'll get to that as well. Because when it hit, I guess when the shit hit the fan, if you want to say, was when, and I quote from the article, then he went to the actual bank and got confirmation from them on the day that I signed the contract, basically saying, the bank won't give you that much, she explained.
So this is interesting because she's gone to, in Queensland, there's usually private treaty. I don't think that we're talking about an auction here. I think we're talking about a private treaty negotiation. And in most cases, you can make your private treaty offer on contract subject to certain conditions. So it sounds like she's gone to sign the contract in Queensland, which is an offer to the owner, not binding at that point by the sound of it, but it could have been binding. Usually it's the buyer that signs first and the seller signs second. So I think what we're talking about here is her making a written offer to buy a property. Now, we're not really exactly clear.
Yeah, because she could mean the contract for the mortgage contract. So we're not exactly sure what contract she's talking about here. We've got a couple of theories on this, but if it was a contract of sale, well, she could have and should have waited until she had the finance sorted out properly before signing anything, unless she had really good condition in there, finance condition in there. And so that's all a bit murky. And this is really where she doesn't sound like she had a great support team.
Yeah, I think she had a support team, but maybe there was something missing. Maybe the right questions hadn't been asked, or we'll get into a little bit more. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
So this is a little story, but the lessons that come out of it are what we want to share with you.
Exactly.
So if it was the contract of sale, she should have waited until she got the finance sorted, or, as you correctly pointed out, had the right condition in place that allowed her to terminate the contract if finance could not be approved. But if it was a mortgage contract, then she's already got the property under contract. She was already in too deep, and it sounds like the broker hadn't properly informed her of all of the money that she would need.
Now, the bank she was going with was taking into account the total HECS debt that she owed, which had actually just gone up due to inflation as well, right? And also the body corporate fees that she would have to pay when she settled on this property. And this meant that they gave her a lower borrowing capacity than they'd been assuming. So
she's gone to a broker, she's checked a borrowing capacity, but the broker hasn't done a formal pre-approval, which is actually go to the bank to say, if a good property comes up, how much money can this person borrow?
And also different banks have different policies in terms of the things that they're going to take out of your affordability, so different brokers. A good broker is really going to understand which banks are going to work better for each different buyer's circumstances, right? And look, to quote the article again, she said she suddenly found herself in a position where she couldn't afford to buy the apartment on her own anymore, and it was down to the wire. She had 24 hours to find an extra $5,000. Now, the sums don't add up here, because in the article it says that she'd saved $48,000, but she needed, she saved $45,000, but she needed $48,000. Now, that's $3,000 to me. But anyway, it's let's not split hairs here.
Details.
She said
it's the lesson we want to take from this.
and she felt that she couldn't afford to wait and pass on the property in order to save up more cash for the next one because the property market keeps getting more expensive.
Yeah,
So,
and that was quoted out of the article.
Yes.
So in the inverted commas there.
Yeah.
And I get that because we're recording this in April 2024, and in most markets, we're still in experiencing increasing pressure on prices. So it can feel like if you can get something together in terms of making an offer and it being accepted, it kind of feels like if I've got to save more and it's going to take me 6 months to save that, what are prices going to have done in the meantime? So I really get that fear that she had. Not a reason to go forward with the wrong property and not a reason to put yourself in great debt, but let's see what she did and let's see what we can learn and what we can pass on to our listeners.
Now, again, we're not exactly sure which contract she's signing there. So if she was actually signing the mortgage contract, she'd already committed to the property. Well, passing on that property was actually not an option for her if she'd already signed that contract of sale. And
if it was unconditional.
Unconditional.
Yeah.
Because she would actually lose her deposit and be at risk of being sued. So our read of this article is that she had the option available to her, which means that she actually had opportunity to avoid all this stress. But let's take it as read that signing a contract could mean she was already committed, in which case she thinks she's got an out that she didn't have. She did not have an out if she'd gone that far into it. And she was very lucky that her parents were in a position to help, right? But this last-minute stress was completely avoidable.
Yeah, and not everybody has someone that they can go to find that extra $5,000 if they're using everything that they have available to them. So she was really lucky in that circumstance. And it was really lucky that her parents had that liquid that they could just provide to her to help get that deal across the line. So, look, we are really sympathetic to the plight of first home buyers. We created this course because we wanted to share our knowledge with people so that they avoided these kinds of mistake. This particular person managed to get onto the property ladder at the age of 26. That is fantastic. That's hard work. And, you know, it is congratulations from us. This is a really good achievement. But there's a lot here that I think we could have avoided, or she could have avoided, Veronica.
Yeah. Look, and despite all the obstacles Gen Z have, she did have some last-minute stress that would have been awful at the time.
Yeah.
As it turns out, was short-lived in the whole scheme of things. But the article ended with this quote from her. It says, "I'd love someone from an older generation tell me what I could have done better," she said. "Well," she asks, "and we shall answer."
Yes, we shall. For your benefit and for your learning, and because we are older.
If you know her, share this with her. Right. Mistake number 1. In the article actually opens up saying, and she engaged a broker to smooth out the process. Now, so the first mistake there is assuming the broker is going to smooth out the entire home buying process, right? Now, brokers are important. You know that we absolutely are advocates for using brokers, but the finance is only a fraction of what you need to know to get it right.
Yeah, and it's not just up to the broker to tell you as a first home buyer. It's up to you to arm yourself with the right questions to ask a broker. Now, in the show notes, we'll give you a link to 5 questions, just 5 of the questions that you should ask a mortgage broker, because you need to have the right questions to be able to then provide them with the right information. It's not just up to them to know what your situation is, or, you know, you go in there with your eyes wide open. So mistake number 2 then was not knowing all of the money that she'd need. It's a lot more than just the deposit. A lot of people go, well, once I've saved my 5% or my 10% deposit, I'm ready and raring to go. But as the article says, she was under the impression that because she was a first home buyer, she'd only need a 5% deposit. Now, there's been a lot in the media about some of the schemes that are available, and but you've got to get the position in some of these schemes, or have the position available to you before you buy the property.
You also have to pay for other costs, and even if you're getting a stamp duty exemption because you qualify for one of the state government stamp duty exemptions, there are still a whole bunch of other costs that go, with it. For example, when you settle on a property, you have to adjust rates and strata levies if you're buying a strata property. And so if you're not factoring that in, you're going to get a rude shock when it comes to settle, because you've got to adjust whatever the owner, the seller has already prepaid, that you're going to be then
Some
taking
things that
over.
people forget are transfer fees. The local government charges a transfer fee. That could be anywhere from a few $100s to, $1,200, $1,500 in transfer fee. So you've got to make sure that you understand all of the costs.
We actually have a link for a blog, which will pop in the show notes, which does go into all those additional things you have to be thinking about, not just the deposit. So that was a mistake. The third mistake, look, I'm going to say it sounds like it was a bad broker. It sounds like the broker gave her incomplete advice. There were no contingency plans. Would other lenders have posed the same problem? It sounds like, it was a bit, no, you'll be right type attitude. Where she did say she asked questions, and that's one of her cry there. Can someone older tell me what I should have done? I asked the questions. And the big issue here is that she didn't know how to choose a good broker. And a good broker is somebody who has the experience, takes the time to give you comprehensive explanation. So we're saying that you've got to do your own research and you've got to take responsibility yourself, because you do. You are the one signing. It's your commitment, your loan commitment. You have to take responsibility. But there are experienced brokers who specialise in working with first home buyers who are prepared to explain all of this stuff every step of the way, knowing that you've never done it before. And there are others that either are inexperienced, don't know, don't care, or whatever. There's how many, 60,000 brokers out there or something?
And there are some really experienced brokers who are more interested in higher value loan opportunities. Yeah. So sometimes choosing a really experienced broker isn't going to get you the hand-holding that you actually need as a first home buyer.
That's so true. And in fact, it's one of the reasons that we did put together, we've got on our website, once again in the show notes, you can find the link to this, is a page of brokers that we recommend who we know will take the time to explain things properly. They've got the experience, but they also care enough and they're interested enough in first home buyers. So that's a really easy mistake to make. Right? That is an easy mistake to make. But it does sound like she told the broker and then was like, didn't actually get the comfort, because she sort of said that she kept saying these things. And if you keep saying them and you really don't think the person's heard you, then you've got to go and find someone you know is listening to you.
Spot on. And mistake number 4, she'd done some research online and knew that the HECS would be a problem. It's part of the process. But this is a classic not knowing what you don't know. Instead, she's been in the article quoted one of the many Gen Zers who have been burnt by the latest HECS indexation. And now, I had a HECS debt when I did my university degree. I'm sure you did, Veronica. And
I was lucky. Only 1 year of my degree was HECS.
Oh, was it really? Oh, my 4 years was.
It came in while I was at uni.
Right. Showing our age again.
Yeah, exactly right. Old enough to be your mum, remember?
That's right. And that's a good thing. But it is true. We since I'm 50 in a couple of weeks, and this has been around a long time, and the need to pay it off and how it's assessed by the banks has been around for a very long time. So we're Gen X, the forgotten generation, but we're Gen X, it's been around for a long time. It's not new to Gen Z.
So what's interesting though, exactly, and yet woe is me. I mean, this is just the stuff you got to deal with, right? It might be, you might hate it, but it's the fact, right? There's no actual interest charge on a HECS debt, but it is indexed for inflation, right? Now, inflation is the reason that, our interest rates have been rising, blah, blah, blah. Inflation is pretty horrible, right? It sucks. The sort of, I guess, there's a forgotten generation, I guess, of those poor HECS debt owners, is that the word? You're owner of a HECS debt. Those people who still have a HECS debt who copped an indexation whammy the middle of last year because we've had so much inflation.
Because CPI has been so strong.
It went up 7.1%. So that means the total debt increased. They might have paid off less than that in the year. So the debt has been going up. So it totally does suck, and it is a liability as far as banks are concerned. So once again, a really great broker will talk to you about options there. I mean, sometimes it's worthwhile paying the debt different circumstances. Like, we can't say it is or isn't.
Options.
These are the things
It's
to be
about
discussed with a broker.
Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. And so she was absolutely right, knowing that it was an issue. But unfortunately, she chose a broker who really wasn't, really wasn't on top of it, and probably didn't understand how that change would impact her borrowing capacity. Who knows? But she didn't get the advice she should have had. So the mistake here is that she did the research online, but when you don't know what you don't know, that's where you run into danger of not asking the right questions of the advisors that you have. And then you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers, and then you're no wiser.
Yeah, and a little bit of knowledge is a very, very dangerous thing when you think that you've done the research, but you don't know what it is that you don't know. And that little bit of knowledge can be very, very dangerous.
All right, so the fifth mistake is probably the most complicated one because we're not 100% certain, but it's the way we've read the article, right? And I guess reading between the lines because we know we know the language and we go, hang on a minute. It sounds like she may not have actually signed that contract of sale before finding out about the additional money she needed, because the article implies that she decided to go ahead because prices are rising and she was worried about missing out completely. And what that means is that she knew she needed to find that money, and then she signed it and then went into a mad panic, which is fair. Like that's fair call.
That is panic stations. But because she wasn't in a terrible position of being forced to go ahead because she had no other choice.
She chose because of FOMO, if we have read this correctly, right? So if this was the case, she put herself under a huge unnecessary pressure, especially in the unit space, and especially since she was buying an area where there's actually a lot of development and quite a lot of apartments available. So I'm not even certain that this upward pressure on prices that she was fearful of, that might have been the media beat up. It might have been the agents were talking it up. But when I actually jumped in and looked at the suburb and looked at what prices have been doing, and I looked at what's been selling, I thought, what's inflating prices there as new developments being released on the market? Not so much actual intrinsic property values rising.
Resale prices.
Big distinction there. And so there's a perception of prices rising, but I'm not 100% certain that it was reality.
Yeah, and look, sometimes as a buyer, when you've invested a lot of time and energy into a process of looking for and finding and going through all the pros and cons and getting yourself to a point of committing to going ahead with a property, it can feel like, but I've done all of this work, so I might as well. Yeah. And it's something that we really ask people to sit back and take stock of. It's not about always looking for the reasons not to buy a property, but it's also about saying, hang on, is there something here that I'm kind of moving forward with because I feel like I've already invested so much time, energy, money, and she probably had not spent any money at this point in time, but that time and emotional energy, it can feel like, well, I might as well just work it out and make it happen. So you've got to be really careful, and I guess this is one of the lessons that I'd encourage you to take out of this is you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't go, look, I've already sunk all of this energy and time into this. I might as well. I'll get the money from somewhere. And that's okay
not the reason to buy a property. I might as well.
It happens though. Taking a deep breath and making sure that it is the right property at the right price and the right circumstances, and you financially can afford it, is more important than going, oh God, I've got to start the whole process again.
Yeah. That is so the wrong reason to buy a property, to avoid having to
just
do
to
something
stop
again.
The process. And believe me, I have seen people at auctions that are they reach their limit and they look at each other and they go, I just can't go back to doing open houses on Saturday again. Let's just pay what we have to buy it, under that emotional pressure of the moment. Auctions, you and I believe that auctions are a good way to buy property as long as you are in control and the emotional aspect is taken out on the day. So you can be in control during an auction. But what I'm saying is we do observe people who get that emotional, God, just make it stop. I don't want to do this anymore. I've had enough. I just want to buy something and stop the process.
Exactly.
And it's not the reason to buy.
No, it is not. So also we note the emotive language, talking about emotive language used in the article. And this does not help first home buyers. It doesn't help any property buyers for that matter. And one example is sneaky fees, right? I quote, she had already spent a few thousand on sneaky costs associated with owning a property, like getting the title transferred into her name and getting pest control reports on the place. Well, I tell you what, there is nothing sneaky about these. And if you have a good broker and or conveyancer or lawyer, they would have explained these sneaky costs. They're not sneaky. And it's just ridiculous to put them forward as if they are.
It's not sneaky, but I also don't understand it because the title doesn't transfer to you until you've purchased the property. So the
How
way
does she spend that money?
What I don't know what she was spending money on. Getting the title transferred into her name only happens upon settlement.
Oh,
so
good pickup, Meighan. I hadn't even looked at that.
I'm so confused by that.
Okay, we're going to put the link to this article in the show notes, but we're actually not recommending you read it. You can, because you can see where we got the source for this episode. The principle is in place. I mean, honestly, I think she's probably trying to become an Instagram influencer, and so potentially this was beaten up a little bit bigger and a bit more dramatic than it could have been.
That's what's behind it.
When you look at all the images on there, you go, maybe, but it doesn't matter, because the fundamental thing is then somebody got caught out at the 11th hour on misunderstanding how much money was actually needed, and that's the lesson of this episode.
Yeah, look, sneaky fees. You know, as Veronica said, there is a link that we've done podcast episodes on this. We've got articles. It is very easy, and within my business, we have a spreadsheet. When we first talk to a prospective client, we have a spreadsheet which send to them based on a number of assumptions, what their upfront costs are going to be, and what they need to budget for when they settle. So that's in addition to any mortgage cost, interest payments, anything like that. You need to know how much money you have available at what point in time. Stamp duty people assume is only ever paid on settlement. It's not. In different states, it can be before settlement after a certain number of days from contract date. So knowing when the money needs to be available and what needs to be available, that's not sneaky or hidden. That's just something you need to find out and budget for.
Yeah, and it's knowable. And that's what we're coming at here. All this stuff, all these mistakes in these horror story episodes we do, all this stuff's discoverable. And that's where it's really scary, because people just assume that, I don't know, everyone else should be telling me this sort of stuff. But actually, that's the responsibility in this country for buying property rests with the buyer. And
caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And that is the basis of property law.
Exactly.
And in different states, we've talked about there's different levels of seller disclosure. So you really have to know what to ask, who to ask, and how to interpret the information. There's nothing sneaky about these. And if this lady had done your first home buyer guide, she would have known all of it. But even if she had a good broker or a good solicitor that she could ask the right questions of, they would have explained these things.
Well, that's it.
If you go in and you say, yeah, I know what I'm doing, then you kind of cut off your nose to spite your face to look like you're knowledgeable without going, if I don't know something about something, I'm the first person to say, all right, pretend I know nothing and start from the beginning. And that way, I don't assume I've got any knowledge whatsoever. Like, take me right from the start of things and treat me like I've never even heard of this concept before. And that way I know that I've got every bit of information that I need and I can make really good choices and decisions. And I think property is very similar, particularly when you're going at it for the first time.
100%. Even in my business, my buyer's agency business in Sydney, it's the most expensive city in this country, right? People who buy property in Sydney have got good incomes, a lot of money somehow, right? And it's funny, over the years, I mean, my business is now 15 years old. Meighan's is 20 years old. Over the years, early days, you'd have someone come along and say that they know something. And so you go, okay, well, I won't cover that then. And
you make an assumption of knowledge.
Every time you would realise that person didn't know anything near what they needed to know. And often it would lead to some huge mistakes. So we go, hang on a minute. We're about to make this huge mistake because you've told me that you know something. Now I'm realizing you don't know it. I'm going to have to go through it now with you so that we can, protect you. But, it didn't take us long to put into our process. Ignore the person who comes along saying they know it all. We don't care. We're going to go to basics and tell you everything from scratch because you probably don't know it. And so
It's important because we even do it with really established property buyers, and particularly if they bought in a different state and they're buying into Queensland. So let's say they've bought in New South Wales. They might have 5 properties in New South Wales. We actually ask them to forget everything they know and just start from a zero knowledge base with us because it is different. And it's amazing how many times people will say to us, oh, it's so different to New South Wales.
And it
so
is
different.
But even people that might have bought something 5, 10 years ago, they do it again. It's like they're not in it day in, day out. It's easy to not know, but to think you do. So look, buying a property well is a process. And it's for good reason that step 1 in our system, the process that we teach in your first home buyer guide, is to get your support crew lined up. Because as this story shows, it's how crucial it is to get the right people on your team and know the right questions to ask them.
Absolutely. And then what to do with the information that you get.
Yeah,
that's so important. Quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know in this podcast, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
Our first home buyer guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations. But not just that. Every week at Campfire, we get people bringing to us links of properties they're thinking about buying, and we can talk them through whether it's an A grade, B grade or C grade property as well. So we're there to guide you to buy better, right? Trust me, you will buy worse, plus you'll overpay by a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.